Hey guys, Godfather of Anxiety here again. I wanted to do a short video on panic attacks and subtle triggers that we may miss. Having dealt with panic attacks for almost 22 years now, certain things, if we've had panic attacks for a while, we know are going to be triggers, right? Whether it be, extreme stress, external stress, internal stress, things that, are big changes, it could be anything, change in jobs, could be something that's big, maybe becoming empty nesters, whatever the case. There's big changes that we know might put us or predispose us to having panic attacks. But what I wanted to talk about in this video are the more subtle things that we might miss. These are things that I've noticed over the years that have affected me personally. And I think if I can give you guys some information here, it might help you to thwart panic attacks from happening in the first place, especially if you're experiencing some of the same things that I have in the past. So one of the first subtle triggers that I think that goes unnoticed is our breathing. And I know this was the case for me. This had to actually be brought to my attention by my wife. I did not realize what I was doing, but I've told you guys how when I drive, I've had issues with panic attacks. That's where my first panic attack took place. And it's always a potential trigger for me to have a panic attack while I'm driving. But one thing that I didn't realize that I was doing was holding my breath. I would be at a light or I would be in a stressful situation with cars on both sides of me, and I'd be holding my breath. And I remember one time my wife was noticing what I was doing, and she said, "Carl," she said, breathe. So our breathing is really important. So we might hold our breath like I had a tendency to do. Another thing we might do that can work us into a panic attack is hyperventilate or breathe rapidly but very shallow. Either one of these things will do the same thing. They'll deprive our brain and our blood of oxygen. And if we're already in a state of elevated stress, or even if we're not necessarily in that big of an elevated stress situation, if we start doing things where we're holding our breath, or maybe over the course of time, we've developed some of these poor breathing habits and not even realized it. I know I didn't, but boy, I'll tell you now, I'll start to feel not well. It might be while I'm driving, it might be in another situation, and I'll realize I'm holding my breath again. So this is really important. It sounds simple and it's like breathing, I promise you guys, learn how to belly breathe for stressful situations. But if you find all of a sudden you're starting to have some elevated stress, pay attention to your breathing. Make sure you're breathing through your diaphragm. You want to breathe in through your nose, feel your stomach lift, and out through your mouth. And you want to do it in a slow and controlled way, maybe to a count of 3 each way. If you do this, don't be surprised if you notice that the stress you're feeling dissipates. So this was, I think, to me, that's something that could be easily missed. We might just have developed a bad habit and not even realized it, but we could either hyperventilate or hold our breath, and both of them are going to put us or predispose us to having a panic attack. This one, changes in routine, is the next one I'm going to mention. And obviously, big changes in routine, we would be on the lookout for potentially having a panic attack at that point. But even subtle changes in our routine can set us up to have a panic attack. I think of the movie Groundhog Day, and Bill Murray's character says anything different is good when he finally when he finally wakes up and it's the next day. Well, those of us with anxiety, it's kind of like the opposite. Anything different, and all of a sudden, we're perceiving danger. And we might not even have done this consciously. It might have been subconsciously. And I've noticed some subtle changes in subtle routines that I've noticed are even a change of season. Even the leaves on the tree or off the tree. This is something that I've noticed has played with my stress levels and sent me towards having panic attacks. And this can be very subtle. It can be, like I say, a change in season. It can be like a subtle change to your job, like a new boss, or it doesn't have to be anything huge is the point I'm trying to make to you guys. But we are such creatures of routine in our desire to have control, right? We're such creatures of routine. As soon as we notice something different, that can predispose us to having panic attacks. And some of the things I've noticed, like I said, change of season, a new job or a new boss, or just something different that, we maybe weren't paying attention to, and then all of a sudden we notice it, right? Because that's what happens with panic attacks. It's like a sudden thing. So maybe it hits us all at once. So those are just some things to look out for as far as changes in routine. The next thing, and you guys are going to get sick of me talking about this, but I really believe this is one of my biggest triggers for panic attacks, and that is a lack of sleep. Now, you might say, well, lack of sleep isn't really subtle. It can be. It's one thing if we know we've gone a week or 2 weeks or however long without getting a good night's sleep. But sometimes, there's two things that can happen. For one thing, it can happen one day. Maybe something happens, one of our children is sick, or there's something unexpected. We just don't sleep that night. And maybe we've had a long stretch where we haven't had a panic attack, but we got like 2 or 3 hours of sleep. It will not take much as far as triggering us to have a panic attack, even with just one day where you're severely deprived of sleep. The other thing that can happen with sleep is it can be cumulative, right? It can be over the course of a week or two that we just aren't getting a good night's rest. And then all of a sudden, we'll have a sleep deficit. And I'm telling you, you'll probably notice other subtle things happening. But you definitely could put yourself in a situation where you'd have a panic attack. But you'll probably, if you have intrusive thoughts, you'll probably notice those starting to creep back in. Just that racing feeling, that's another feeling, or any feelings of derealization or depersonalization. Anytime that I deprive myself of sleep, I notice that these things creep back. And I've had probably in the last 2 or 3 years, I probably had maybe a handful of panic attacks, maybe 5, probably not even that many, maybe 3 or 4. And every single time, I have been in a sleep deficit to varying degrees, every time. And so that's why it doesn't have to be, I went 3 days without sleep, or, I haven't slept in a month. It doesn't have to be anything like that. This can be subtle. That's why I'm talking to you guys about it. And it's so important for our mental health and to ward off panic attacks. Get your sleep. This is another one, and I think this is something that we might not realize. And it can occur in a variety of ways, but it can be we can be in an environment where we've had a panic attack before. It can be a smell. It can be a place. I've been very candid with you guys. Getting in an automobile after my first panic attack, I'd start to have one. Just getting in the automobile, much less driving or being on a highway. So, remember, it's fight or flight, right? So that's designed to keep us alive. So our minds are not just going to, if we've had a panic attack in a situation, our minds aren't just going to cast that aside. It's filing that away because that was according to your mind, that was a life or death situation. So, it could be a smell that accompanied a panic attack you've had in the past. It can be an environment. It can be anything that your mind feels that deja vu feeling, like, uh-oh. It could be maybe you had a panic attack in a grocery store, in a certain aisle in the grocery store. And you're walking around, you're not thinking about anything stressful. And all of a sudden you start to feel that feeling. And then go ahead and pay attention, guys. You might be in the exact situation you were at another time when you had a panic attack. Because again, our mind makes these correlations without us even realizing it. This doesn't have to be something we do consciously. Again, the whole idea of the video is things that happen subtly, right? So that can be, like I said, it can be a scent, it can be a memory, it can be a place. Any of those things can trigger us to have a panic attack. So that's another one. This is another one I wanted to mention. Hidden stimulants. So like we realize if we drink 5 cups of coffee, we might be putting ourselves, if we're caffeine sensitive, we might be putting ourselves into a situation where we could have a panic attack, right? Or at least lean in that direction. But like if you I work out, I always work out. It's part of my therapy. And you have to be careful with supplements. There can be a supplement where you're looking for a specific ingredient that maybe is a stimulant and you want to avoid. But some of these, what they'll do is, if they aren't directly a stimulant, what they'll do is they'll heighten the effect of a stimulant. So if you take a certain supplement, maybe a pre-workout, and then you combine it with having your regular cup of coffee, you do this and all of a sudden you might be setting yourself up to have a panic attack. I'm very careful about using any type of pre-workout or anything like that. I tend to stay away from that. And if I do use one, I use it. Anything with stimulants, guys, I do half the dose. When you have anxiety, that's always start, if you are going to use a stimulant as a booster, which you might, a lot of people with anxiety and who have panic attacks, you can't even have caffeine. Personally, it's not a big trigger for me. It could be on an empty stomach or if I'm abusive with caffeine. Otherwise, it's not. However, stimulants that I've had in pre-workouts and different supplements absolutely can trigger panic attacks. And I can go all the way back to when ephedra was on the market. And I had a very bad experience with that. So just pay attention to the labels if you're taking supplements. Also, some things we don't realize how much caffeine we may have had. It adds up, You've had some chocolate. If you're really caffeine sensitive, you have a candy bar and you add it to your coffee or whatever, and all of a sudden the amount of caffeine's going up, and that can, especially like maybe on an empty stomach, you can start having that racing heart. You can start getting those feelings, and depending on where we're at in our recovery, once you've really recovered, that might just be an uncomfortable feeling like, boy, I wish my heart wasn't racing. But if we're early in our recovery, that could easily trigger a panic attack. So look for hidden stimulants. That's another subtle thing that can cause panic attacks. And now the last one is something that is exceptionally good for us and necessary, but it can cause panic attacks. and that's exercise. So, we just got through January. A lot of people are trying to turn over a new leaf. They're trying to, if they've gotten away from the gym, they've gone back in. Maybe they're doing more cardio. Again, depending on where we're at with our recovery, certain things that happen that are actually really good for us, right? When we exercise, your heart is supposed to elevate, especially doing cardio, but even when you're doing weights. I mean, I don't run on a treadmill, but during my workout with weights, I'm always up near 160, 165 at the top end of my heart rate range. And and I'm usually, my average heart rate is 120 plus during my workout. And that's just with weights. So what can happen is that heart starts racing. Even some of the good chemicals that get released when we exercise, if we're early in our recovery, it can be misinterpreted, right? We have these hyperactive amygdalas, that things that are really supposed to be good sensations like excitement, or they can be misinterpreted in such a way where you end up having a panic attack. And I know for a while, it took me a while, guys, to get so that even after I was treated and I was doing better, I still had to it took me a while to work through the exercise thing. Because you have to remember, even when I first started getting treated, I was about 360 pounds. And, exercise can be dangerous if you're, in your late 30s and you weigh that much. So you have that going on in your mind, and, and then you're reacting to an elevated heart rate. And so it took me a while to work through it. As I lost weight, it became easier. I do wear a fitness tracker. I know some people with health anxiety, really bad, that can be a trigger. So that you're going to have to examine yourself and see whether or not having data at your disposal, like a fitness tracker, is a good thing for you. For me, it tends to be a good thing, and I'll tell you why. Because normally the heart rate, the oxygen are good. So even if I feel like I can't breathe, the oxygen says 99%, 98%. I hate to break the news to you, you're breathing just fine. Also, with the heart rate, I mean, a lot of these fitness trackers now, you can do an ECG where, if you're worried about an arrhythmia, they'll check you for that. I mean, obviously, they're not going to be able to diagnose a heart attack, but for me, it works out well. And I know for some people, they start to obsess about it, and they start to obsess about the changes. And, if you have health anxiety really bad, a fitness tracker might not be a good idea. But for me, it works out well. And so, yeah, that exercise is something that you're like, well, should be good for me. But anytime your heart rate gets elevated, especially, it can trigger a panic attack. And I just wanted to say this. I wanted to say this at the beginning of the video, but I'll say it now. Not every panic attack has a trigger. I promise you guys. I have been fairly well rested, on cloud nine, completely engaged in something I enjoy, and had a panic attack. So, I know that there was a lot of people talk about how it's your thought pattern that gets you to a panic attack, and it can. Anticipatory thinking and catastrophizing, it can lead you down that road to a panic attack. But I've had so many panic attacks that were not were not preceded by any anxious thoughts. They weren't. And some of the time, some of these subtle things were going on, right? Maybe a change in the routine or a lack of sleep, or sometimes it's that. Other times, I haven't been able to find a specific trigger. Obviously, those of us with these anxiety spectrum disorders are predisposed to having these types of issues. And I've already gotten into the area in your brain on each hemisphere, the amygdala, they tend to be hyperactive in people with anxiety spectrum disorders. So a lot of the neurotransmitters are misinterpreted, or something again that's supposed to be a positive ends up being fight or flight, life and death. So anyways, I just wanted to make this video so that you guys can be on the lookout for these things, because they're more subtle, right? And you might not realize something that small can trigger a panic attack. And if you guys can get out ahead of these things and work on your breathing, make sure obviously that you're getting treated for this, but work on your breathing, work on your sleep. If you guys can get out ahead of this, I don't think anything sets me back more than if I have a full-blown panic attack. You feel like you're starting almost back at square one. So that's why I want to try to keep you guys from being in that situation, because we can be well on our way to recovery and feel great about things. And then, we have just, some subtle changes happen and we didn't get enough sleep and boom, we have a panic attack and we feel like, and I know that feeling like, oh my gosh, all this work, I thought I had this behind me and now this has happened again. And what am I going to do? So that's why to me, it's really important to try to avoid them if you can. Once you get really good at it, you'll realize that it's a panic attack. You'll label it, you'll let it happen, and it won't have the same effect that it has when we're first having them. It was just a nightmare for me. So anyways, thank you guys so much for the engagement with the videos, the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Let anybody know who's having panic attacks or any of the anxiety spectrum conditions. Let them know about the channel. I think there's a lot of good information that in some tricks that you can learn that can keep you from, having setbacks, having relapses, or, like this video. Hopefully you guys, if you notice maybe that you're holding your breath or you're hyperventilating, these little things that we do subconsciously, if you can avoid doing them and avoid having panic attacks, your life is going to be exponentially better. So thank you guys so much. And until my next video, take care.